John, you're going to take that seat, or you want to? There's someone.
I need to leave.
Okay. Okay. David, do you want one of these, or we can move a chair back there if you prefer for the view?
What about this one?
Yes. And that everything's working good here?
Yeah.
Okay. When you get the lights, okay? We need to dim them once you get started.
No, everything's bright.
Okay. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out and supporting Land Tenure Center. And what did we do? What did we settle on? LASIX. I want to say LASIX. And thanks for coming out. This is the first of what will be 7 talks this semester. We did this series last fall as well, and had I think maybe a dozen talks, half a dozen films, pretty packed schedule. We've slimmed down a little bit and also made an adjustment to move from an afternoon talk to a lunchtime series. And I guess we didn't really emphasize that in the promotion, but next time you're allowed to bring your lunch and bring something to munch on. And other than Steve's unusually large orange there, I don't see anyone else eating, but please feel free for future events. The first 2 talks are co-sponsored by LASIS, and it looks like most of you here are a result of that partnership, so thank you for coming out and supporting us. The series as a whole sort of spans themes, disciplines, geography. The first 2, as I mentioned, Latin America, we're looking at Brazil today. Obviously next week is a topic set in Honduras. From there, we move back to the States and Southern Appalachia. We're doing a co-sponsorship with the Weston Roundtable Series, and our speaker will discuss the Wilderness Society. From there, we come back to Wisconsin and have a guest speaker from the Department of Ag, talking about land access, particularly for beginning farmers in this state. April 5th, we welcome Florence Chenoweth, the former Minister of Agriculture, Republic of Liberia. She'll be talking about their recent efforts on land tenure policy. On April 19th, we welcome a speaker from Aurora University. He's a historian who looks at film, and he's going to be looking at Chicago Loop and sort of a cultural geography, urban space discussion. And then we finish things off on a regional discussion on Africa and Chinese investment in Africa, which is an increasingly important topic. So again, welcome. And I should also mention, let me pass these around. These are LAX's lectures for the semester as well. These sounds like, my guess is some of you already have these, but I'm going to circulate those. This is also available, by the way, both on our website, which is a sublink on the Nelson Institute's website, and I have this in PDF if anyone would like this, and if anyone's willing to post these in strategic places around town or campus, we'd certainly appreciate that. I first became aware of Lisa's work, I guess, about midway through last year, and was immediately interested not only for the land theme, the sort of research methodology. I had also been involved in involved at some level in the soy project myself. But mostly I was interested because we share an interest in Lusophone culture. Lisa in Brazil, obviously, and in my case, I lived and worked in Mozambique for many, many years. So it's nice to be able to promote that a little bit. I guess you'd say bom dia, I'd say bom dia, but other than that, we're kind of, dealing with some of the same things, right? We do our best. So I'm going to let Lisa tell you about her work. That's the very point. But I should mention briefly that she is a research associate with SAGE, Center for Sustainability in the Global Environment, here at UW, part of the Nelson Institute, as is Land Tenure Center. Her research interests include environmental governance, commodity agricultural expansion, and land tenure and land use dynamics in the tropics, again, especially in Brazil. In her work, she approaches these issues by drawing on diverse methods that combine analysis of GIS, policy analysis, and field-based interviews with producers and stakeholders. She completed her PhD in geography in 2013 at the University of Kansas and has been the recipient of numerous grants and awards, including a Fulbright in 2011 to conduct field work in Brazil. Her research has been published in Land Use Policy, Professional Geographer, Historical Geography, and the Journal of Peasant Studies. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. Talk for 30 minutes, somewhere in that area.
So.
Okay. Like and then, right, and then we'll just throw it out for comments and discussion. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you guys for being here. I'm really excited to be participating in this series, kicking it off for the semester. I just briefly want to request or pitch that you all consider next week's talk as well, who is a colleague of mine and Ian's from back in our days at the University of Kansas where I got my PhD. So his work's really awesome. So you guys won't regret it if you can see that. Brad did a great job of introducing me, and I just want to kind of introduce the lab that I work with as well, which is the Gibbs Land Use and Environment Lab over in Sage. Our group studies kind of a broad suite of forest protection policies, especially several that relate to large-scale commodity agriculture production in the Brazilian Amazon. And we're always trying to figure out about these policies. Do they work? If so, how? If not, why not? And so some themes about that are present in our work that are kind of more general relevance to other people's groups are about navigating through kind of muddy waters, about competing and changing incentives for the people that are affected by land use policies. And also a theme that you'll see come up in this talk a little bit that we're always dealing with is the imperfect availability of imperfect data. So today I'm going to talk to you guys a lot about a particular policy called the soy moratorium, which I'll explain a bit in a couple of slides. And I'm going to look at this policy from 3 different perspectives. So at first I'm going to talk about the context from which the policy emerged and kind of situate it briefly within this concept of governance, which I'll explain in a moment. And then I'm going to dive into trying to talk about the progress that we've made in understanding if this policy is in fact effective. And so we've looked at this from 2 different ways. First, we've looked at it from above using maps generated from satellite images of deforestation and soy expansion. And then we've also looked at it more recently from below by examining more closely the verification systems involved in the policy and the way that soy producers are actually interacting with the policy on a daily basis. Before I dive into all that, I'll just briefly bring everybody up to speed in case you're not into the tropical forest the way we are, and say that it's not news that tropical forests and what happens to them are really important to all of this. But I'm going to go ahead and say that the stakes for this, for the future of forests are continually rising. And just recently, in December of 2015, at the United Nations Conference of Parties in Paris, the world finally recognized that officially and codified the preservation of forests into the world's plan for ensuring that we don't face disaster from unmitigated climate change. And then the importance of the Amazon in all of this is that it's the world's largest expanse of tropical forest. And that's really important because it's an enormous reservoir of carbon, which if it were to be cleared, it would be released into the atmosphere and be fairly devastating for all of us. And then 60% of the Amazon rainforest is located within Brazil's territory. So what Brazil does about forests is incredibly important. And besides the importance of the Amazon rainforest for carbon purposes, the rainforest is also an important reservoir of biodiversity, loads of endemic plants and animals. It's important for regional and probably global water cycling. Millions of people live in the Amazon and their livelihoods depend on the forests or on the areas surrounding the forests. And then it's an increasingly important site for food production of the calories that we're all going to require in the next 50 to 100 years around the world. This is not a very big desk. And then one last kind of background slide for you guys is that I want to give a brief history of the recent deforestation in the Amazon. Of course, the Amazon's been inhabited and used by people for, over 10,000 years. But since 1988, Brazil's space agency called INPE has been monitoring and mapping clearing of the Amazon rainforest using their system called PRODIS, which is kind of like a gold standard, well-respected mapping system that they developed. And you can see from this graph up here that from 1988 until the mid-2000s, deforestation trends were steadily rising. And then after the mid-2000s, around 2004, deforestation trends began to decrease and more recently have sort of plateaued. Most of the deforestation that's contained in this deforestation graph applies to this entire area, which is the Amazon biome, all of this kind of green and dark brown area. But most of the deforestation that is included in that graph has occurred in the states of Pará, Mato Grosso, and Rondônia. And in these states, which are sometimes referred to as the arc of deforestation because of the prevalence of deforestation there, a lot of this deforestation has been driven by soy and cattle production. And in this part of the Amazon, soy and cattle production are by far the most important uses of land that's been cleared. By now, about 65% of the total area deforested in the Amazon is pasture, and about 5% is currently being used for soy production. But soy is of great importance in particular parts of the Amazon, including in the state of Mato Grosso, which is what most of the rest of my talk is going to focus on. So you can see the yellow is the soy extent, which shows up not that great. It's basically kind of concentrated in here. And then the dark brown is the pasture, and then the green is the forest that was still standing by 2012 when this map was made. Since 2004, leading up to 2004, the rising rates of deforestation in the Amazon were becoming pretty alarming to a lot of people. And so beginning in the mid-2000s, a lot of different efforts were implemented to try to control this deforestation. And some of these efforts came from the public sector. Most importantly, the Brazilian government began to map. They improved their monitoring processes so that they could better tell what was going on in the Amazon. And they also improved enforcement of the forest code, which is the Brazilian government's main piece of legislation that governs how forests will be used. The forest code applies to the whole country. But today, since we're mainly talking about the Amazon, I'll just go ahead and explain a little bit how it works in the Amazon. And for private properties in the Brazilian Amazon, each property is allowed to clear a certain percent of their property. And so in the Brazilian Amazon, where you would normally have forests standing, you're allowed to clear 20% of your property. So that means that with some exceptions, which I can explain later if you're interested, 80% of the property must remain standing as forest, which is pretty significant. The government also implemented an environmental licensing program. Only since 2012 has this licensing program been online for the entire country, but beginning in about 2006, environmental licensing was in place in the states of Pará and Mato Grosso, where the federal system is modeled on these state systems. These boundaries are important. This licensing is important because it is a georeferenced boundary of your property that you file with the government and that has your name attached to it. And so given the way that forests are governed in Brazil, it's really important to know the boundary of the property so you can know if you've exceeded the percent that you were allowed to clear, and then the government needs to know your name, so if they find out you've been clearing illegally, they can fine you. Civil society groups also got engaged in the management or the attempts to reduce deforestation in the Amazon. So you had a lot of different, mainly environmental NGOs, local and international, that started mainly smaller scale efforts to improve the efficiency of ranching activities or to promote environmental licensing. And then finally, what we're going to mostly talk about today are the private sector efforts to address their responsibility for the clearing that had been going on in the Amazon. So various companies and groups of companies implemented zero deforestation policies beginning in the mid-2000s up until different companies are still implementing them or changing the terms of their policies. But for example, the cattle industry has one, and our group has done a lot of research on the cattle industry zero deforestation policies. But what we're going to talk about today is the first of these zero deforestation policies, which is called the soy moratorium, and it was implemented in 2006 by most of the soy traders that operate in the Amazon. And now that I've said all that, that's the division of all of these policies into the different sectors of society is a little bit of a simplification, because now I'm going to go ahead and contradict myself and talk about all of the ways that all of these different sectors were involved in this private sector policy. But so it goes. So what happened? What is the soy moratorium and how did it come about? In 2006, Greenpeace published a provocative report called Eating Up the Amazon, and they accused major soy traders like Cargill of causing deforestation in the Amazon, and they were right. Since then, we know that up to 30% of new expansion during this time period leading up to 2006, new soy areas, came directly at the expense of forests. So we're talking clearer forests, plant soy. This report and then other very Greenpeace-esque actions, including public protests and going into fast food restaurants to point out these associations, served as a catalyst for a larger group of environmental non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, including the Nature Conservancy, WWF, and then local Brazilian NGOs as well, to work together with all of the major traders of soy like Cargill, Archer Daniels Midland, Bunge, et cetera, to ban the purchase of soy on land cleared after 2006 in the Brazilian Amazon. How did this come about? Because soy traders aren't consumer-facing companies. You wouldn't expect them to be vulnerable to this kind of pressure. Like, I don't buy anything directly from Cargill. And so what happened was Greenpeace, in addition to putting pressure on Cargill, they also put pressure on retailers. McDonald's in Europe, Walmart, Waitrose, which is a big British grocery store chain. These are the kinds of companies that do care what consumers like you and I think about their products and their sourcing. So the result of all of this was that retailers like McDonald's were worried about their reputational risks with consumers like us, and then the traders were worried about losing the business of these retailers over these risks to their reputations. So that's how the soy moratorium was sort of brought into being based on all of this pressure. The reason that Europe was the focus of all of these marketing efforts and all of this pressure was that Europeans are generally seen to be more environmentally conscious in terms of their purchasing behavior than other groups like Americans overall, Madison notwithstanding perhaps. And the majority of soy that was being produced in the Amazon at this time was being sold into the European market. Now that has changed, and actually China is the main trading partner with the Amazon and soy. So this strategy turned out to be really effective. In fact, Greenpeace has used the same strategy to catalyze changes in the beef sector and in the palm oil sector since then. So in 2006, all of this happened, and then within a couple of years, the Brazilian Space Agency joined the effort and agreed to conduct all of the monitoring that would be required to enforce this policy and to identify all the farms that had deforestation related to soy, and then to share the list with the traders to help them avoid purchasing from these farms. And so it's important to know that only deforestation followed by soy planting triggers a farm being placed on the blacklist. So if a soy trader or if a soy producer clears an area but doesn't plant soy on that area, then he's not going to be blacklisted. He only gets blacklisted if he plants soy on the cleared area. The soy moratorium has been renewed every year or two since, and it's currently set to expire in May of 2016. So that's why this is all why we sometimes refer to the soy moratorium in our work as an example of supply chain governance. This is a reference to the engagement of several parts of the supply chain in the policy, with the NGOs placing pressure on the retailers and the traders, and then the traders placing pressure on the producers to ensure that the desired behavior takes place. And to the concept of governance, which there's a load of literature about this, but loosely refers to situations in which there are non-state actors engaged in defining or helping to define the rules that other groups have to adhere by. And then finally, I'll just note that traders and soy producers operating in Brazil remain subject to Brazil's own laws, including the forest code that I described. So soy producers also cannot clear illegally, and traders are still not allowed to buy soy from areas that have been cleared legally, that's all covered by Brazil's own laws. But the fact that no area, regardless of its legality, can be cleared today and used for soy production and still be compliant with the soy moratorium has led a lot of people to say that the soy moratorium goes beyond Brazil's own laws. So as with any policy, traders want to know as soon as possible, did it work? And so in my mind, there are basically two ways to think about the objectives of the soy moratorium and assess its successfulness. The first is whether or not traders actually cleaned up their supply chains and are successfully excluding any soy that's produced via a production pathway that involves deforestation. And to assess this criteria, we kind of have to rely on circumstantial evidence because there's no public traceability system involved in the soy moratorium. Traders say that sharing their supplier lists would threaten confidential business interests of their own and would threaten the confidentiality of producers. So there's that. But then, on the other hand, we're able to say something about this criteria because the traders that volunteered to participate in the moratorium altogether purchase about 90% of the soy that's produced in the Amazon. So they create a block where they have basically full control over the production chain that's coming out of the Amazon. And so in this way, they have the influence to spur producers to comply with the soy moratorium without risking much leakage of deforestation-associated soy into other kind of parallel supply chains, which is a common problem with some of these commodity-specific deforestation policies. And then finally, the fact that the soy moratorium group, the traders, have partnered with really well-respected environmental NGOs and eventually with different agencies in the Brazilian government also lends a certain amount of credibility, even though third parties have a difficult time assessing whether or not the traders are truly excluding the soy from their non-compliant soy from their supply chain. This allows a little bit of credibility to say that, well, if they say they're doing it, maybe they wouldn't be allowed to get away with it, with not doing it. A second criteria for success of the soy moratorium is whether or not the moratorium is actually limiting the expansion of soy onto areas associated with the soy moratorium. And we can get at this question with satellite images of soy maps and also deforestation on an annual basis. And so the idea behind the soy moratorium from this point of view was that if no one was buying soy associated with deforestation, the soy would not have any value any longer and people would stop deforesting to produce soy, and so they would save forests along with the traders' reputations. So in this way, the soy moratorium did appear to show rapid results. The soy moratorium's annual report, which has come out every year, I think since 2008, has told us, basically the soy moratorium doesn't issue farm by farm results, but they issue kind of aggregated results. And so they've come out and said that, since 2006 until recently, only about 1% of the deforestation in the Amazon has been associated with soy production, and only about 2% of the new soy areas added have been associated with deforestation. And then last year, our group was able to confirm these findings by mapping all of the soy and overlaying it with deforestation, and we were able to find that the green bars here in this red box here, which highlights the Amazon part of this graph, show that over time, deforestation that directly replaced, or soy that directly replaced deforested areas has gone down from about 30% to nearly zero. So that's what the green bars are showing you. And the red bars are the rest of the soy expansion on a percent scale. And then this isn't because there has been no new soy expansion. We were also able to show that with the black lines that each year new soy was added. So the black line is an area that is now soy that was never soy before. And this did not happen in other places outside of the Amazon where the soy moratorium doesn't apply, like the Cerrado, which is a whole other biome in the Amazon that's got this, or in Brazil that has a totally different set of policies that apply to it, but it's also a major source of soy production in Brazil. And it did not experience these same patterns. And so that's some circumstantial evidence that, okay, well, maybe the soy moratorium is working. If Amazon deforestation for soy stopped during the soy moratorium, but it continued elsewhere. However, of course, academics, including us, and activists have also been critical about this measure of success. because there are basically two, I guess, challenges that you have to address if you're going to say that just because deforestation for soy declined during the soy moratorium, that the soy moratorium was successful. And the first of these challenges is the question of additionality. And so it so happens that the soy moratorium came online in the Amazon during a time when a lot of other policies were also trying to control deforestation. And many of these policies, most of these policies also applied to the soy producers. So how do we know that the reduction in deforestation for soy had anything to do with the soy moratorium? We explored this argument and we didn't find any evidence to support the fact that it was something besides the soy moratorium causing this pattern that we found. What we did was we overlaid annual maps of soy area, property boundaries that we downloaded from that environmental licensing system that I told you about in Mato Grosso, and then maps from the Protus deforestation data. And we were able to look at the carved properties which are where soy is produced, so we call these soy properties. Those are the orange ones on the map. And we were able to find out that although 115 farms have been blacklisted for violating the soy moratorium, 5 times that number during the same time period deforested illegally, so they violated the forest code. So there's about 3,500 soy farms in the Amazon, just to give you guys kind of a sense. And so 115 violated the soy moratorium, and then about 600 violated the forest code during the period that the soy moratorium was enforced. So this suggests to us that soy producers' behavior was likely truly affected by all of these different policies that were in place, but that the potential for market exclusion from traders is particularly motivating because soy production is the most profitable activity per hectare in the Amazon, and so it's hard to imagine if a soy producer is already clearing an area and he could plant soy in that area, why he wouldn't. All right, and then a second challenge that must be resolved to truly assess the effectiveness of the soy moratorium is this question of leakage of deforestation from the policy or indirect land use change, which I'm kind of going to use interchangeably here. So the idea is that even though the soy moratorium may have deterred direct deforestation, the main expansion pathway, which is just a way of saying the main kind of land on which soy tends to expand, is not actually forests, but it's cattle pastures. And so then the argument is that when soy replaces a cattle pasture, it's displacing that cattle to someplace else, which is likely resulting in deforestation somewhere else in the Amazon, even if it's really far away from the original soy property. So this schematic here kind of explains what I mean. So here on the end there you have it says original area used for growing soybeans, and then it shows the soy kind of expanding onto the neighboring area that was originally used for pasture. So then that would be the direct land use change effect of the soy expansion, right? And so then the question is, what happens to those cattle? You know, did they go away? You know, maybe the producer retires, we don't know. Maybe the rancher retired, or maybe he took his profits from selling that property to the soy producer and he went somewhere else, maybe where the land is cheaper and he could buy a lot more land. And then maybe he bought some area that was already cleared, but more likely he probably bought some area that was not cleared because that would be the cheapest land that he could buy, and he cleared it. So in that way, people who talk about indirect land use change say that the soy production expanding onto the old pasture would be indirectly responsible for deforestation, even if that was pretty far away. That's the concept of indirect land use change or displacement. And it's true that before the soy moratorium, 60% of new soy areas did expand on the pasture, which we saw. And then following the soy moratorium, by design, 100% of new soy areas are expanding onto pasture because it's basically the only other kind of land in this region. It's pasture, forest, and soy areas. So if the soy can't expand on forested areas, it has to be expanding on pasture. So the question is, how much responsibility does that expansion have for deforestation taking place elsewhere? In this view, the soy moratorium would not only fail to correct for the main problem for forests of soy expansion, but it would exacerbate it. The problem is it's really hard to prove if soy is responsible for deforestation that's taking place really far away, even though this concept may ring true. But a lot of people have tried, and there have been some statistical models that have shown that soy is in fact responsible for a certain amount of deforestation.